One of the reasons why the trad wife trend is so harmful is because in America, a good wife is defined as a white woman. And she's not just white, right? She takes care of her family effortlessly. She does it with ease. She does it perfectly. She does it without breaking a sweat. And all of that, she receives credit as being moral and good because she does all those things. And you might say, no, Danita, that is a burden that is put on all women in America. The burden of being a perfect wife is something that's on all women, but that's not true. And that's not true because in America, whiteness is the measure by which, well, worldwide, but we're talking about America right now, whiteness is the measure by which every other thing is compared. And so it is not all women that are the perfect wife. To be the perfect wife, you're going to have to be a white woman. And let's also remember that white supremacy is nonsensical. Okay, it's nonsensical. It has absolutely no problem contradicting itself. So part of the messaging is you need to do it effortlessly. You need to be the one who takes care of her family without breaking a sweat. But you also want to be credited for the effort it takes to do the work. Okay, all of that is a carryover from the days of enslavement, from Mrs. Enslaver, and the incredible amount of work she had to do to manage the enslaved population who was doing the domestic, like in-house tasks, not the agricultural domestic tasks, but the in-house domestic tasks. And that carryover lands there. And I'm about to take a left here, but I promise you I'm not lost. Okay? I find it to be very, very interesting that I see this same thing happening in the trend of sourdough bread making. And you might be like, Danita, what? Listen, I can't tell you how many times I've gotten on this app and watched a white woman put five chicken breasts, a gallon of milk, and 3 blocks of cream cheese down in her crock pot and cut it on, and then walk across her kitchen and show us her sourdough starter. The meal is telling me that the cooking skills are minimal, but the sourdough is telling me that somehow you're a baker of that. Like, you need to make homemade sourdough, but that gallon of milk and them 5 chicken breasts are dinner. And I hope you're asking yourself right now, why did so many white women, and I'm talking about white here and here, take to making sourdough, who clearly have very little appreciation for the skill of cooking? And that is normally something that they inherited from their mothers. And the reason why is a carryover from the days of enslavement. So during the days of enslavement, we know that all the domestic work, including the cooking, was done by enslaved Africans and African Americans. But what ends up happening is Mrs. Enslaver steals that culinary knowledge and begins to teach other white women how to be perfect wives, how to be enslavers, and starts writing cookbooks in order to pass on this knowledge. And in those books, these perfect white wives tell other wives how to be perfect white wives. They say that the one thing that they need to learn how to do, that they cannot only let that skill live with the enslaved cook. The one skill they need to have is bread making. They need to know how to make a loaf of bread. Why? Because if they fall on hard times and they have to sell their cook, they need to be able to bake a loaf of bread to feed their families. Okay? Now, to be clear, I'm not saying you need to throw your sourdough starter out. Okay? I'm not saying that. I am saying that we got to stop acting like the racism, the white supremacy, the practice of enslavement, that the ideals and ideas at the founding of this country do not have a heritage attached to them that we are still actively participating in. That there's a way to do it and we're still doing it, and that the trad wife, trad life trend is showing us in many ways how to get that done. Okay? All right. Take care of each other out here. Hey, this is your reminder that no amount of quiet luxury changes the historical origins of or the intended destination and outcome of the trad wife, trad life aesthetic. No amount. No crossover of trad life with luxury changes where it's going, where it's headed, and the intent of the trad wife aesthetic. Okay, we've seen this before historically, where wealth has been used, right, to try to sanitize nonsense, where the human inclination to want to aspire to something has been waved in front of our faces as this is the life that we should aspire to, and morality is always attached to that, and goodness and wholesomeness. Okay, so just want to say, all right, don't let the quiet luxury part. Okay, all right. Whiteness allows you to access results from skills that you don't have. And what we're seeing right now, right, we're already hearing it, is a slow move. I think it's going to be a pretty firm pivot, though, away from white women who are content creators into white women who call themselves documenting their lives. They're just documenting their lives. The aesthetic is also going to change. The archetype of the digital influencer, the face of digital influencing for white women is going to shift from this hot mess mom, aesthetic, neutral palette, that other mom, who's, perfectly, all that is going to shift from that into what I'm kind of calling like a 90s sitcom mom archetype. It's going to be colorful. All this neutral palette's going to go away. It's going to be squarely inside of the home. It's not going to be outside. It's going to be inside the home. And it is going to be deeply, deeply coded in white nationalism, but never having any of the implements or symbols of it in that space. It will also be completely scrubbed from anything that is ethnic or in any way connected to anything that is not white. Because what we're having collapse here is probably like the 4th or 5th era of the MLM. Okay, the original MLM was cookbooks. I can tell you about that later if you want to know. The current MLM is the digital influencer, right? And white women love an MLM. A Pampered Chef, an essential oil, a Tupperware. But the problem with MLMs is that they get too top heavy and they collapse. And I think that's where we are now. We're at the collapse of the influencer, right? Especially with what is happening politically and what's happening economically. That pivot is going to be a hard pivot to a retreat into the home to consolidate in there. And the move away from content creation into documenting also creates the opportunity to avoid accountability while still being in authority. Because I'm just documenting, right? But it sure does seem like advice. It sure does seem like aspirational. It sure does seem like a parasocial. But no, I'm just documenting. Here's the problem. These folks, because in order for this to work, that white woman influencer is going to have to double and triple down into being like the sturdy, very much pulled together, but not in a like type A way. She's just got it, right? She's not gonna have 1,100 kids. None of that's gonna be going on. And in order for her to present like that, in order for this to work, she's going to have to double down, because she's going to have to convince anyone who's seeing this that she has skills. She'll have the results, right? But because it's going to consolidate into the home, she's going to have to convince us that she has skills. The mommy bloggers, when all of that kicked off, they didn't have to convince us that they had skills. They took pictures of stuff that looked pretty, but we never tasted it. And when you tried those recipes, they didn't work. Right here on these apps, right? The person who's making this content, it's not documenting. It looks pretty, but what does it taste like? We don't know. We don't even know. We don't know what it smells like. We have no idea, right? So when you consolidate into the home, and that consolidation has to happen because of what's happening, like I said, But where's the skill? We know that the skills are not there because we know historically white women and whiteness does not believe in skill development. It doesn't hold that value. But you can't keep standing up and playing in the faces of people who are actually bearing the brunt of this economic, right? So you're going to have to be able to be an authority. Well, how are you an authority without skills? Because then you can be held accountable. Well, you're documenting. You're just, right? You're just a mom. You're just a woman living a woman's life. Like I said, you want 37,000 of his children. She's going to have to perform being stable. She's going to have to perform being a little even maternal. She's going to have to perform being smart. But not like academic. She's going to have to perform being a 90s sitcom mom with clean girl aesthetic turned up to. So gain the skills, please. Skill development. Acknowledge that it's not there and gain the skills. Gain the skills. Resist the urge to consolidate into the home, to believe that what these folks are selling you is the product. It's not. They're not selling you the product. That's how MLMs work. They don't sell the product. You need to move some units, but it is the result of labor that has not been credited, that has not been taught or understood within context, that is then being transferred for some kind of currency, attention, dollars, right? Social capital, right? Outside of the context of the skill and the labor and all of the things that make that result, that make that end product actually what it is. And because performance is always going to be the key action of whiteness, it will always be the key action of whiteness. It will never, ever require skill development. Okay. I'll talk to y'all later.
The reason why so many upper class white women are finding out how to keep house, how to homemake through TikTok and through social media and through influencers who teach these sorts of skills is because there is a society of ineptitude when you get to the upper echelons of class status. And with the turn of the economy, there are a lot of people my age who are now realizing that we are not going to live in the same economy as our parents, meaning we're going to have to learn how to do a lot of this ourselves. I did a whole podcast about homemaking and the skills of domesticity with my friend Victoria, who's time and tenderness on here. We come from two very different backgrounds. She is a Latina woman, and there's a much more accepted history of Latina women learning how to keep house. Whereas I talked about how I became a homemaker and had to learn kind of all of these domestic skills by myself because I always had a domestic worker in my home growing up. I grew up in Westchester, New York, in a very wealthy area in the 90s, very peak stock market, bro, hedge fund 90s era. So most of the homes around me all had a full-time housekeeper. Because that's how I grew up, there was this almost elitism for being inept, for not knowing how to do these things, for not knowing how to do your laundry. It was a social signifier of wealth. And you'll still find this in upper class society. Look at Donald Trump, who says he hasn't driven a car in 30 years. The subtext underneath it is that you've always had someone to do these tasks for you because your time is more valuable. And if you look back historically, upper class white women who stayed home often would have a domestic in their home. And who do you think those domestics were? Danita Platt does a fabulous job breaking down the history of this, the history of how we look at domestic labor, the history of who is doing the domestic labor. And I just think it's really funny that white women are now getting on this app and learning how to keep house from the women that we used to pay to keep our house. Because when the economy shifts, skills are always useful. We're starting to see this rise in self-sufficiency being a priority to people who used to be able to, through the nature of wealth and class, be absconded from needing those skills. Enter the trad wives and the TikTok housekeeping gurus. Now, this conversation obviously does not apply if you are from a lower income background or an immigrant background, one and the same sometimes, sometimes not. But different communities look at domestic labor differently, and that's kind of the point that I'm trying to make, that upper class white women are now being thrust into a world where they need these domestic skills that they used to use as a social signifier that they were inept at. Although my husband and I have increased our income over time, when we were first married, when we first had kids, all of that domestic labor was on me to learn and me to maintain. The reason why so many upper class white women are finding out how to keep house, how to homemake through TikTok and through social media and through influencers who teach these sorts of skills is because there is a society of ineptitude when you get to the upper echelons of class status. And with the turn of the economy, there are a lot of people my age who are now realizing that we are not going to live in the same economy as our parents, meaning we're going to have to learn how to do a lot of this ourselves.
And one of the ways that whiteness shows up in domestic spaces is through performance. That's because whiteness tells white people they don't need to learn skills. They only need to perform. And this is actually one of the ways that whiteness protects itself. Because whiteness would have us believe that the enslaved population did not have any skills. It wasn't skilled work. Domestic, but not skilled, right? So if you can execute without the skills, then you're fine. Well, that worked just fine so long as modern day folks could hire skilled people to come in and do the work. And they could just perform the parts they wanted to perform. And I know when I say this, y'all get a little tight, but this is what I mean with all this decorating for all these obscure holidays, right? No domestic skills, but buying up Targets, you can get your house set up for Groundhog Day. So performing, right? Curating, presenting, right? But the skills, right? Because they're aligned with enslaved labor, immigrant labor, the working poor. So whiteness then believes, oh, that's not something I need to do. I don't need to do that. The problem being, though, when you can't purchase the skill and now you need to actually bring the skill for now that, right, now we're struggling. As to be expected. When we have tasks performed without skill in context, that is aspirational content. And aspirational content has this undercurrent of surveillance in it. The need to survey and to be, you are being surveyed. I'm measuring, I'm comparing, what am I? Okay, well, right? That's not community, right? And that, all of that comes out of white supremacy. That is a part of white supremacy. So as I always say, gotta decide if you're going to be a tool of white supremacy. If you have a tool of white supremacy in your hand by the way you're thinking, right? And just decide what you're going to do about that. If you're going to, just let us know so we know what to do with ourselves. If you're not, you're going to put it down, right? Then go ahead and learn the skill in context. Now, if you've gotten this far, I'm going to give you some questions to sit with to help reconcile this. But before I do that, please don't get in my comment section telling me how your people didn't own slaves and so none of this applies to you, or how your mom and them scrubbed the floors and toilets on their hands and knees and none of this applies. First of all, I don't need to hear that. Second of all, what was your mom and them aspiring to? How did they feel down there scrubbing floors and toilets on their hands and knees? I'm not talking about somebody else's toilets. I'm talking about the toilets that they sit and use. Did they feel like second-class citizens down there? Okay. So that idea comes from okay. Let's do our questions. Where did your ideas about domestic labor actually come from? You got to sit with that question. You got to dig through that. Okay. And who were you taught is supposed to do the labor and not supposed to do the labor? And why were you taught that? Got to sit with that. And before I go, Hot Mess Mom is just the other side of that same I don't need skills coin. Okay? All right. I love you. Bye-bye.
Black women are the blueprint to homemaking. They just don't get credit for it because they're Black women. Because while other races or women are spending all day making sourdough bread just to serve it next to organic chicken nuggets and Auntie Anne macaroni and cheese, Black women are calling their children to make sure they take the meat out of the freezer so they're able to prepare a homemade meal when they get off of work. But now that I think about it, the reason why Black women aren't credited for homemaking is because we always had to work. Okay, hold on. So because Black women have had to work and homemaking has now become a performance, mainly because some white women lack the skills to actually be a homemaker, so they have to supplement the income that homemaking would have eliminated by having those skills, by getting online and showing them performing homemaking. Black women can't be considered homemakers. Because think about it. When a black woman is in the kitchen cooking, you don't see her as homemaking. You see her in a position she should have always been in service. When you see a white woman in the kitchen cooking, you see her as a homemaker, taking care of her family, a lady of leisure. Why is that?
Hey friends, I want to talk about the stuff around the house that in general nobody wants to do. Everybody hates doing these tasks, but we need to do them for the house to run, right? How did we get here? Like in our thought process, where did that idea come from, and how do we put distance between ourselves and that idea? Watch the video that this video is connected to if you want a little background, but let's jump in. So in general, the tasks we're talking about are things like laundry, cleaning, cooking, dishes, cleaning up behind, feeding and caring for children, right? In general. There's this general idea that these tasks are low, demeaning, that they debase the person who has to do them, that they don't require skill or intellect, and that nobody should want to do them. But historically, in America, here is who nobody was. This is nobody, this beautiful soul. White supremacy tells us that this is who the laundry's waiting on. This is who the cleaning is waiting on. This is the nobody wants to clean. This is who the food preparation is waiting on. This is who the children are waiting on. And this is who the dishes are waiting on. And so because of whiteness and white supremacy, and we defined whiteness in the last video, we see that there's all of this stuff attached to these tasks because these tasks were done by this subordinate class, right? And I really don't want to hear anything about, well, we didn't own people. You don't need to own people to be impacted by white supremacy. And the fact that you need to talk to me about that is concerning. And then the questions about, well, how does this show up in POC? How, first of all, it's people of color, black, indigenous, okay? Second of all, you want to be the center of every other thing until it's time to talk about white supremacy. And then you want to talk about everything else. No, you listen, we're talking about you. And that's what we're talking about, is self-reflection, because you have a certain attitude about these tasks and he has a certain attitude about these tasks. And why is that? And why is the division of labor conversation different when it's time to go buy up Target to decorate for these obscure holidays y'all like to decorate for? Why are we not talking about the division of labor then? You may have thought that was rhetorical, but it wasn't. This is from the National Archives. It's about the New Deal. We have teaching pamphlets on spring cleaning showed a young white woman sewing, hanging curtains, and observing a clothesline of wash to illustrate the themes of dress up, fix up, spruce up. Only the brochure on clean up showed a black woman, and she was a laundress bending over a tub, presumably filled with curtains and that were ordered for the white woman's household. Other pamphlets designed for white women stress ornamentation and comfort with instructions on decorating. Because white supremacy has told you that effortless care is the goal. It's also where you gain social capital with one another. And this is also why we don't see images of sweaty white women on TV cleaning their houses. And to be clear, the goal of, I want to be seen as one who effortlessly takes care of her home also has in it the invisible labor part of, or taking credit for invisible labor, of I also want to be credited for the effort it takes to be effortless. See how that? So, if your conversations about the equitable division of labor in your home, how are we going to take care of our home? If it has any of this in it, you have a tool of white supremacy in your hand. Now, you have to decide, if you're going to set that tool down. You have to make that decision. You also have to decide, am I being a tool of white supremacy? And am I going to opt out of that? Next time, we're going to talk about how to set the tool down and how to opt out. And I am sure that it's going to lead us into the almond mom and ingredient only household conversation. Take care of each other. The stuff around the house that in general nobody wants to do. Everybody hates doing these tasks.
I love Danita's content. She normally does how to contend with taking care of your household for ADHD people, but she's done a 3-video series on the tasks that everybody says they don't want to do in the household. And she's making this fascinating connection between the stuff that we say we don't want to do and white supremacy. So if you think about the things that women complain about in the nuclear family, they are all things that would have been done by a servant in previous times, and probably a black servant. So you don't see us complaining about bearing the children, for example, but you do see us complaining about the laundry, the cooking, cleaning up the house. And in the third video, she talks about how people are indifferent to learning the household skills because they are seen as being below. They are seen as being dumb, too easy, and effortless. And why do we see them as dumb and unskilled? Well, probably because of the people who traditionally did those jobs. That's what we thought about them. And Danita says that we can actually be a tool against white supremacy by learning household skills, by not being indifferent to learning how to mix your cleaning products in a way that is super cheap and healthier for your family, learning how to prepare a meal and being very good at cooking, learning sewing. And this just collides beautifully with the talons that capitalism has in our back. Because we don't know how to prepare our own meals, we're dependent on a meal service. Because we don't know how to mend our own clothing, we are stuck with fast fashion and shopping as a way to survive and for a leisure activity. In the book Women Who Run with the Wolves, which is about reclaiming our wild spirit, the author talks about the handmade life, how when we sink our hands into our own soil and mend our own clothing and make our own shoes, we are deeply invested in the technique and the value of the stuff that we own. I'm starting my summer garden seeds inside, and one of the best ways to ensure that you keep on your garden is to actually make your own seedling pots and start seeds inside instead of going and buying them from the nursery when they're mature plants. And the reason is because you're emotionally invested in those seeds. You've already taken care of them for a while since they were babies. And so I just want to encourage you to start learning the skills of the home, if only to save money and have more autonomy. Imagine you fall on hard times or your industry goes out of style. Wouldn't it be great to be able to fall back on artistry of some kind, homemaking of some kind, meal prep of some kind? Those skills are super valuable, and we need to bring value back into them.
So I'm talking about, go watch the video this comment is on, but it's talking about Black people exercising autonomy. So my grandparents were sharecroppers in the South, in Virginia. And when they stopped sharecropping and they bought their own land and built, houses and etc., you would think then that my grandmother would be considered a stay-at-home mom, right? Oh, your grandmother's a stay-at-home mom, right? Here's the thing though. The white woman up the street bought my grandmother her laundry every week, never gave her any laundry powder, and came back the next day looking for what? Would she come back expecting? That laundry to be done. And when that woman's children didn't have anything better to do, they would come on down the street uninvited and be at my grandparents' table eating up everything, doing whatever they wanted to do, right? And then when they, I guess, got tired or bored or whatever, when they were finished, they went on back home. Until those kids were probably like 12 or 13, and their father said, you can't go down anymore and play with them kids. So just because, what does that mean? What does that mean? Doesn't mean a thing. No, because there's something that overrides. It overrides checking the box. It overrides, I've arrived into the area. I've ascended up into the, there's something's gonna override that. It's that melanin. That's those ideas. It's gonna override that. So all of that to say, Black folks exercising autonomy in domestic spaces will always be revolutionary. It will.